Imagine if a single document could topple an empire of lies in mere seconds. In just 46 seconds, Donald Trump flipped the script on Jasmine Crockett in a blistering live national television showdown, unmasking her web of deceit and demanding her swift ouster from Congress. But Trump held steady as a rock of unwavering integrity. He didn't blink. With razor-sharp focus, he produced a concealed dossier locked with a crisp white seal and methodically exposed a page, a chilling directive scrawled in bold blue ink. "He's the barrier. Neutralize him." Hushed murmurs swept the room. The nation froze in suspense. What explosive revelation in that dossier left Jasmine Crockett ashen-faced on screen, her empire of schemes shattering in front of the world. The crimson signal light blinked once, then held firm. Outlets such as C-SPAN, CNN, MSNBC, and Fox trained all their cameras. Room 214 of the Reburn House office building throbbed with unbridled energy, raw and electric, like a tempest on the verge of unleashing fury. The plaque read Committee on Oversight and Accountability. But the vibe inside promised something vastly more volatile, where one bombshell disclosure might trigger a seismic shift in power. Jasmine Crockett made her entrance right at 12:30 p.m., trailed by 3 aides, a press advisor, and a tactician who dodged every gaze. She was attired not like a public servant, but like a warrior, primed for combat in a crisp gray ensemble, jade necktie, and silver emblems formed like darts. She grinned smugly as though the limelight belonged to her alone. Even in her chair, she seemed ready to seize control if the tide turned against her. A dozen feet opposite sat former President Donald J. Trump. No elaborate entourage, no ostentation, simply a slate suit that radiated unyielding resolve, his hair groomed impeccably. Sparse adornments except a subtle gold brooch inscribed USA. His stare never flickered, never weakened. It evaluated Crockett like a guardian detecting a fraudster's feint, tells probing for the vulnerability that would unravel the whole charade. He had yet to speak a syllable. "No need." His poise proclaimed it all. "I came equipped to dismantle a falsehood, not just weather it." The area was not quiet. It was smothered. Quiet offers serenity. Smothering fosters anxiety, masquerading as poise. Assistants shuffled files too softly. Journalists keyed notes with shaky digits. Even the marble ground seemed to swallow echoes. Room 214 felt suffocating that afternoon, as if everyone intuited a pivotal turn was brewing, but no one could foresee who would light the fuse first. Picture a committee room where secrets simmer just below the surface, poised to erupt. What covert plot hid in the undercurrents of this panel, eager for exposure? Chairman Mike Johnson coughed lightly, signaling the launch a countdown in motion. Today's discussions, he announced, will scrutinize the validity of fiscal statements campaign, associated entities, and potential moral lapses by sitting officials. Everyone grasped the undertone. This went beyond general guidelines. It targeted Crockett, and judging by how she realigned her stance and reclined into her gleaming seat, she knew it well. The opening presenters were standard, tedious by intent, but beneath the boredom glances shot like secret codes. Crockett whispered to her aide, who smirked and bobbed agreement. Trump stayed frozen until the clock struck 1246. That is when he delved into the portfolio. Not with flair, not like an entertainer, like a detective unveiling evidence. He avoided looking down. He memorized every detail. The group did not comprehend yet, but that gesture, the unsealing of an ordinary binder, ignited the blast. Somewhere, several rows distant, a journalist drew breath too abruptly. Crockett's face constricted. Her ornament clinked the chair as her hold strengthened. No mallet struck, no shout rang, no proclamation, but cameras honed in by reflex. Because when Donald Trump disclosed that binder, America braced for the shockwave. What could lurk in a paper so plain that even the marble partitions seemed to bend closer to catch its unveiling? Envision a file so potent it could crumble a fortress of fabrications before billions of eyes. Could one modest dossier demolish a meticulously crafted illusion right there on global stage? Crockett inclined forward, bit by bit, elbows digging into the walnut desk as if prepared to preach. Her voice dripped, calculated contempt laden with the aura of one used to barking orders and witnessing instant compliance. That individual, she proclaimed, motioning toward Trump without turning fully, has committed to sowing turmoil throughout this nation. He is not here for responsibility. He is here to pose. A hindrance. A hindrance to our republic. No one budged, not even the transcriber's fingers. Trump showed no response. He lingered, letting her allegations settle like fog across the chamber. Then, without lifting his pitch, he posed an inquiry that sliced the hush like a razor. Congresswoman Crockett, might you explain why $10 million streamed from a covert company in Malta into your affiliated group mere days before the Texas vote? There it was, the spark kindled. Crockett recoiled, not in fear, but in wrath. She swept her eyes, left right then, straight pupils blazing like beacons in shadow. She gave no reply, no rebuttal. She seized the active mic ahead, still broadcasting nationwide, and spoke 3 words that detonated the venue. Eject him immediately. A momentary pause, a unified gasp. Then she echoed louder, more ferocious, as if sheer loudness could reclaim dominance. Her utterance rebounded from the marble walls, edged enough to slice. Chairs grated. One Capitol guard hesitated at the side portal. A second leaned in from the far wall. Trump did not stir. He remained direct sight locked on Crockett's visage, not with trepidation, but with something keener, more terminal. The broadcasts held steady, no ad breaks. The populace absorbed every utterance. Crockett pivoted to the chair. He is out of line. He is fanning untruths from concocted papers. Her hands quivered not with fright, but anger veiled as virtue. Trump moved finally, not to rise, not to contest. He reached into his solid briefcase, deliberately intently, and drew out a tan envelope creased at the rim-crisp white stamp across the fastener. He laid it on the table before him and tapped it gently once, as if it throbbed with life. A whisper from the press row, "What is that?" He stayed mute. Words were unnecessary. The envelope spoke volumes. Crockett's jaw clenched. She tilted forward in her seat, eyes squinting as if straining to read the insides through the casing. Trump met her glare for the first time and uttered just 4 words. Serene, clear, surgical. "You composed this, did you not?" the chamber petrified. Even the air stilled. In that heartbeat, the equilibrium did not just pivot, it splintered. Crockett had tried to silence him with might. Trump retaliated with something infinitely deadlier proof. As 2 Capitol officers stepped nearer, Trump nudged the envelope an inch closer to his mic. The white stamp caught the overhead glow briefly, dazzlingly like a lesion craving to be lanced. Crockett's voice resurfaced, this time wobbly. "This is a scam. This is lunacy." Trump ignored her now. He spoke to the American public through the camera lenses and said, "You wanted me gone. But maybe the paper inside this envelope is what finally sends you packing." And just like that, a nation edged closer to its screens because the actual inquiry had just ignited. What phrase could be so condemning that a legislator tried to exile the holder of it live on air? How desperate must someone be to bury a truth capable of destroying their world? The envelope lay flat on the desk like a silent predator. Donald Trump moved with purpose, cracking the white stamped seal with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this moment in his mind for weeks. No spectacle, just firm, cutting resolve. Like a detective peeling back a veil no one else dared touch. Officers froze in their tracks. Staff stopped scribbling. Chairman Mike Johnson blinked but uttered nothing. Even the room's air felt heavier, as if the walls themselves had leaned in to listen. Across America, living rooms filled with electric tension. Trump unfolded a single sheet of ivory paper. The edges were crisp, slightly worn, but the handwriting was aggressive. Ink lines pressed hard, slanting forward with intensity. He lifted it and placed it under the overhead projector. The screens burst to life. Every monitor in the room, every broadcast across the country now displayed one page. In the top left corner, the 5th of March, 2024. Top right, a faint watermark from congressional stationery. Center just above the bottom fold, a chilling sentence underlined 3 times. "He's the obstacle. Eliminate him." Signed beneath that with unmistakable swirls and force. JC. The cameras shifted to Crockett. No one instructed them. They just did. She didn't move, but something changed faintly. The color drained from her face, and for 10 full seconds she sat frozen. It was long enough for the whole country to realize something had just gone horribly wrong. Trump kept his eyes on the page. His voice, when it came, was controlled and stern. "This letter was delivered anonymously to my office 4 weeks ago. Independent forensic testing confirms the ink is less than 5 months old, and the signature matches 7 authenticated congressional correspondences down to pressure point analysis on the capital letters." Crockett's attorney jumped up, shouting objections. Words like fabricated, unverified political stunt, but the room wasn't listening. The truth was no longer confined to legal jargon. It was printed, enlarged, and burned into the eyes of millions. Trump finally looked at Crockett. His tone didn't rise. It didn't need to. You tried to erase me with an order, but I brought something harder to erase. Crockett shifted in her seat, muttering, "That's not mine. This is fake." Another hit job, but her voice cracked. It stumbled over syllables like a person searching for ground she no longer stood on. He lifted the page again, this time holding it high enough for the gallery to see. "If that is not your handwriting, Congresswoman Crockett," he said, "then why is the ink still fresh? No one spoke, not even the reporters." For one breathless moment, the entire nation sat at the edge of its seat, not waiting for answers, but for the fallout. When truth is written in ink and signed with intent, how do you deny it when the whole world is watching it unfold? What if a forgotten expert's word could lock in the guilt beyond any doubt? No one in room 214 moved. The letter still hovered on the monitors pinned under the stark glare of the document camera. Every line of ink glared back like a fingerprint in public view. Donald Trump sat steady, hands folded, letting the silence marinate. It wasn't just a pause, it was a test. Who would dare speak next? The answer came from the most unexpected corner. "I've seen that handwriting before," came a voice from the side bench. Calm, Midwestern, unmistakably certain. All eyes turned to the witness gallery. It was Harlan Reid, 68 years old, former senior White House archivist under both Republican and Democratic administrations. He had handled everything from policy memos to crisis declarations. For 25 years, he was the final gatekeeper between a lawmaker's pen and the archives. He stood with effort, but without hesitation, his eyes locked on the screen. "That's hers," he said. "No doubt about it." The pressure on the capital O, the loop of the E. "It's her." Crockett didn't look his way, her jaw tense, knuckles white against the leather armrest. But Harlan didn't flinch. He stepped forward and placed a printed comparison beside the document camera. A verified Crockett signature, from 2022 certified by the National Archives. Identical strokes, identical aggression. Chairman Johnson cleared his throat. "For the record, Mr. Reid, you're prepared to testify under oath." He nodded. "I don't need an oath to tell the truth. But yes, I am." The room shifted. The energy wasn't speculative anymore. It was certifying. Cameras caught every angle. Staffers whispered into phones. Outside, producers at every network scrambled to place graphic overlays, but nothing could keep pace with the internet. By the time the chairman gavelled twice to restore order, the hashtag was already trending. Eliminate him. Document. 5 million posts in 15 minutes. Clips of Trump's questions, screenshots of the letter split screens comparing signatures like crime scene reconstructions. Someone online even paired the line, "He's the obstacle. Eliminate him," with images of other leaders Crockett had publicly targeted. The narrative was no longer just about Trump. It was about every voice she had tried to suppress inside the chamber. Trump hadn't moved, but his silence was no longer passive. It was strategic. He was letting the room implode under its own weight. Crockett finally leaned toward her lawyer and whispered something, but the mic picked it up. "They're not supposed to have that." The room heard it. So did every viewer at home. Trump finally spoke, eyes still on the letter. "Not supposed to, but we do." Then he looked at Harlan, nodded once, and turned back to the monitors. "Truth has a strange way of showing up," he said, "especially when it's written in your own hand." And just like that, the chamber wasn't debating anymore. It was reckoning. How do you deny what's written in ink when the whole country has already read between the lines? What if a governor's remote testimony blew the lid off a statewide cover-up? The chamber had barely recovered from Harlan Reid's testimony when the screen behind the dais flickered to life. The broadcast didn't announce him. He didn't need it. The second his face appeared, composed razor sharp, framed by the seal of Florida's Attorney General's office room 214, fell into complete stillness. Ron DeSantis didn't wait for permission to speak. "For the record," he began, his voice clipped and clear. "That letter was authenticated by my office 8 weeks ago. Ink analysis confirms it originated between the 1st of March and 8th. Handwriting matches 4 separate congressional correspondences from Jasmine Crockett during her term. And yes, she signed it." Gasps rippled across the room. Chairman Johnson hesitated, then leaned forward into his mic. "Governor DeSantis, are you stating that your office conducted a private investigation into this document?" DeSantis didn't blink. We were conducting a broader inquiry into irregular campaign entity activity connected to local networks. The letter was submitted anonymously attached to a confidential witness deposition. We verified its legitimacy, but political pressure prevented us from disclosing it." His final words hung in the air like gunpowder. Political pressure. The meaning was clear. Someone somewhere high had buried the evidence, and Donald Trump had just exhumed it live on national television. Crockett sat back in her chair, arms crossed, visibly seething. "This is absurd," she snapped. "This is just another one of those witch hunts. A hoax wrapped in legal theater. Classic Trump, classic DeSantis, manufactured lies from bitter men who hate this country." She said it slowly, bitter men, and let the insult hang. The reaction was instant. Trump didn't flinch. DeSantis didn't even blink. Instead, he smiled. "I may be determined, Mr. Trump," he said through the monitor, "but my facts are calm. My evidence doesn't shout. And the last time I brought something to court, it cost deceptive operations hundreds of millions." Crockett shifted in her seat. A crack in the performance. The chairman cleared his throat again, clearly unnerved. "Are you prepared to submit your office's authentication as part of the congressional record?" DeSantis nodded. "Already done. Your staff should be receiving the file transfer as we speak." On cue, an aide entered from the back of the room and handed the chairman a USB drive inside a sealed state envelope. Trump finally broke his silence. "So to recap," he said, locking eyes with Crockett, "I was ordered out of this chamber for asking about money, but now we have a signed letter authenticated by a governor containing a direct threat against a former president." He leaned forward slightly. "Still think this is theater?" Crockett leaned toward her mic, sneering. "You've always been the drama, Trump. You and your crew of radical liars. This isn't oversight. This is a show trial, a setup." He leaned back smug, but DeSantis's voice came through the speaker one last time, measured final. "Then tell me, Congresswoman Crockett, why did your ink match?" And in that moment, even the floorboards of room 214 seemed to hold their breath. When the truth is verified, stamped, and delivered, what's left for a liar to hide behind? Imagine the tension snapping like a taut wire when safety becomes the ultimate weapon. The air in room 214 had turned heavy like static before a lightning strike. With the letter now authenticated, the signature matched, and DeSantis confirming its origin, the hearing was no longer a political spectacle. It was a live threat assessment. Something primal stirred in the room. Fear not. Fear of losing votes, but of what might happen next if this lie was allowed to keep breathing. And Marjorie Taylor Greene, ever the realist, felt it before anyone else. She leaned forward into her mic, her brow furrowed with concern. "Mr. Chairman," she began, given the nature of the threats made and the sudden emergence of state-level criminal evidence, "I move that we adjourn this hearing for the safety of former President Trump and the integrity of this body." It wasn't performative. Greene had lived through turbulent events. She'd seen what incitement looked like, and this felt like the kindling all over again. The room stirred, unsure whether to agree or brace. Trump stood slowly, not rushed, not rattled, just rising like something inevitable. His hands were calm, his voice clear. "I respect Congresswoman Greene more than words can say," he began, turning toward her with a small nod. "But I didn't come here to be shielded. I came here to expose." He turned his full attention to the chamber, to the cameras, to the millions of eyes he could feel pressing through the lens. "If I leave," he said, "the lie leaves with me." He let it hang there, sharp as glass. "So I'm staying." The impact of his words was seismic, not loud but deep, like something settling in the bones. Crockett scoffed from across the table, loud enough for every mic to catch. "Spare us the performance," she muttered. "This is what he does. Turns every moment into a stage." Trump didn't turn to her. He didn't need to. "I'm not performing," he said evenly. "I'm defending. And I'm doing it in front of the very woman who wrote a sentence about me like I was an obstacle to be eliminated." He stepped toward the center of the room, now framed by marble and resolve. His voice was steady, not defiant, but prophetic. "They're watching Congresswoman Crockett. People in Orlando and Staten Island and Mobile, Alabama. Men who've been called obstructive workers, who've been told to fall in line. Citizens who've been told to shut up. They're watching now. And they're not blinking." Greene held his gaze for a moment. Then she leaned back, folded her hands, and said softly, "The floor is yours, Mr. Trump." A nod of trust. A passing of the torch. Trump turned to the chamber and lowered his voice. "And you might want to stay too," he said, his tone now a whisper the whole room leaned into, "because what comes next might involve you." There was no motion, no gavel, no sound, just the pulse of a nation realizing it wasn't watching a hearing anymore. It was watching history choose sides. When a lie dares to speak in a room built for truth, will you stay and fight? What if a digital trail exposed a conspiracy stretching across oceans and borders? Trump didn't waste a second as the chamber held its breath in the silence. Left behind. He stepped back to his seat, tapped twice on his tablet, and the room lit up. A massive screen behind the dais came to life, filled edge to edge with a high-resolution bank transaction record. Black lines of data highlighted routes and blue arrows tracing the path of 10 million. The hearing room was no longer just political theater. It had become a forensic crime scene. This, Trump said, pointing to the first note on the flowchart, is the Crockett-affiliated entity registered in Virginia. From here, the funds moved quietly to a shell company in Panama with no listed employees. His voice remained calm, but the material he unleashed hit like gunshots. Then to a second firm in the Caymans, and finally into an account held by a private bank in Singapore. No taxes, no disclosures, no oversight. The screen zoomed in as he spoke. Line by line, each transaction lit up in sequence-dated, coded, traceable. The movement was fast, less than 36 hours between all three steps. "This isn't donation mismanagement," he said. "This is engineered laundering." A murmur rolled through the room, soft but unmistakable. Crockett shifted in her chair, arms crossed. "That's not mine," she barked. "Anyone can draw lines and throw names on a screen. This is another fiction built by people who hate success." But his tone lacked its usual bombast. It cracked at the edges. He looked not defiant, but cornered. Trump didn't respond to her. He turned to the screen again and clicked to reveal the fifth page, an internal ledger marked Shadow Reserve Initiative, Emerald. The room tilted. That term hadn't appeared in any filing before. He let the phrase sit there. Two Capitol staffers exchanged glances. One gasped. This initiative, he continued, was flagged by the Treasury Enforcement Division 3 months ago. Until today, it had no confirmed political affiliation, but this account linked to the final deposit in Singapore shares a routing number with, she tapped again, a company tied directly to Crockett Global Outreach. A new image appeared, an account summary with the name of a Singapore-based holding company. Below it, a signature J. Crockett. The gallery erupted in whispers. Analysts in the back of the room sat bolt upright. Crockett leaned forward, voice rising. "I've never seen that company. I don't know what he's talking about. This is manipulated. It's lies. All of it." But no one was shouting him down. He was shouting into space. Trump stood still, letting the evidence speak. Then he looked at the chairman. The paper trail doesn't just exist. It's pristine. And when money runs in silence, it tells you who thinks they'll never be heard. He turned back to the room, and now they've been heard. The screen faded to black, but no one looked away. Because what they'd just seen wasn't a theory. It was a blueprint. If money could move across oceans in less than a day and a half, how long had the silence been paid for? And who else was cashing in? What if a ghost company revealed a network of shadows designed to evade every eye? The screen on the wall snapped to a new slide. Simple, sterile, and devastating. A corporate registry page appeared, pulled from an international database, listing the recipient of the Singapore transfer. One company name, 0 board members, 0 employees. A registered address that, when searched on Google Maps, showed nothing but a weathered post in an alley behind a shop in Georgetown. Trump's voice was quieter, now colder. "This is the entity that received the final 10 million. He circled the box labeled Horizon Pursuit Ventures. A company with no staff, no building, no tax filings, just a bank account and a mission. The words hit harder without volume because the data was clean, surgical, impossible to deny. "Shell company," someone whispered from the gallery. The phrase carried like a ripple across the chamber. Trump let it settle before continuing. "It exists for one reason, to move money in the dark without fingerprints." He paused until now. From the third row, a man stood, gray, blazer, soft voice, but eyes sharp with decades of experience. His name was Sylvia Grant, a senior financial auditor with the Government Accountability Office. She raised her hand, but Trump had already called her name. This wasn't improvisation. This was precision. "I was assigned to review irregular financial transfers linked to domestic political groups," Grant said, approaching the front. This company was flagged within 15 seconds of cross-referencing routing codes. She tapped the screen highlighting the final transaction. No payroll, no board, just a digital vault that existed long enough to receive redirect and disappear. Crockett snapped fake data. You people are obsessed with me. You create fantasy spreadsheets and then call it truth. She slammed her hand on the desk. This is your sick revenge tour because I didn't play your Washington games. Her voice boomed, but her words landed flat. The room didn't flinch because shouting doesn't erase evidence. It only echoes louder against facts that don't move. Sylvia remained steady. We pulled IP logs, timestamp records, server location trails. The money moved in under 38 minutes. She looked at Trump, then at Crockett. This wasn't just hidden. It was rehearsed. The screen changed again. A login record appeared. Time zone Eastern. Location tag West Palm Beach, Florida. Trump didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He simply let the room see it. This is what accountability looks like, he said. Not rumors, not opinion. Data, pure and traceable. His voice was steel wrapped in velvet. You can deny the headline. You can mock the messenger, but you can't erase the math. Crockett laughed short, sharp, hollow. What's next? You gonna blame me for the weather too? Trump didn't respond. The numbers were doing it for him. And somewhere in the quiet as the last slide faded to black, someone in the chamber whispered what the country was already thinking. If this company didn't exist, then what did they need it to hide? And how many others were still out there, invisible and waiting to be exposed? What if a heartbroken story shattered the armor of denial in an instant? The screen went dark, but the damage was done. The paper trail was complete. The company didn't exist, but the consequences had. Trump stepped back not to retreat, but to let the weight of truth settle across every wall, every rib cage in that chamber. No one moved. Even the oxygen in room 214 seemed reluctant to circulate. Then from the fourth row of the public gallery, a sound broke the silence wet, cracked human. A man, maybe late 52nd, stood up with trembling hands. His body shook not from nerves, but from something older. Grief. My sister, he said, voice ragged, died in our living room. It took 5 days because we couldn't afford the care. His voice wavered but didn't fall. She lost her insurance when the changes were stalled. We used to watch these hearings together. Now I'm watching alone. The room froze. Cameras turned. Even the Capitol officers paused in place. He took a breath and looked down at Trump. I don't know what a facade company is. I don't know what concealment does, but I know what it feels like when someone powerful signs a form and someone average vanishes. Crockett turned her head away. Trump didn't speak. He didn't need to. He simply lifted his hand and held it out toward the man, open steady, without words. That one gesture was louder than any monologue. The man covered his mouth and sobbed into it, and the chamber, this marble box built to contain power, fell silent. Not out of obligation, out of guilt. Journalists lowered their cameras. Staffers stopped typing. No one in that room, not even Crockett, had a line ready for this because data might be denied. Documents might be deflected, but grief, real grief, doesn't blink under pressure. It bleeds. Trump turned back toward the chairman without ever dropping his hand. Power signs the order, he said quietly, but silence does the rest. He turned his eyes to the row of entity documents still visible on the smaller monitors. Pages and pages of movement, money traveling in shadows, while people like that man's sister were dying in plain sight. And then he looked up to the cameras not just to speak, but to indict. How many more families, he asked, were eliminated quietly? While the cameras pointed elsewhere, no one had an answer, because deep down, they all knew this wasn't just about one transfer, one company, one letter. It was about all the names that never made it to a hearing, all the people who didn't get to speak. And as Trump sat back down, the cameras didn't pan to Crockett. They stayed on the man because that's where the real evidence was. What if the biggest scandal wasn't the money that moved, but the lives that didn't? What ally arrives? Unannounced to tip the scales in a battle of truths. The man had barely returned to his seat when another presence shifted the air in room 214. A low murmur spread across the gallery. Quick, electric, unmistakable. Lauren Boebert had entered the chamber. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Wearing navy from head to toe, she moved with precision down the central aisle, bypassing press aides and stunned staffers. Her eyes locked on Donald Trump. No nod, no whispered coordination, just one step forward and then another until she stood shoulder to shoulder beside him, Two champions, two stories, one wall of defiance. The camera snapped to wide angle. Every major network adjusted their frames. Suddenly, the image that filled America's screens wasn't a woman in question. It was two leaders who'd survived everything she tried to bury. Trump with his proof, Boebert with her voice, neither blinking. Chairman Johnson tried to regain control, tapping his mic twice. "Representative Boebert," he began. "You were not scheduled to appear before this committee." His tone was clipped, but his posture had changed, like he knew whatever script he held was about to burn. Boebert turned calmly. "I'm not here to testify. I'm here to support the former president in submitting further evidence, since some members of this body seem determined to ignore the ones already screaming at us in plain sight." Crockett scoffed audibly. "Perfect," she muttered. "A conspiracy duo. What's next? You going to hand out hats and chant on cue?" Trump said nothing, but Boebert smiled, a slow, calculated smile. "I've chanted before Congresswoman Crockett," she said, "usually while watching my constituents fight policies that drain their pockets dry. But today I'm not chanting. I'm documenting." She handed Trump a folder, a sealed document packet marked with the emblem of the Colorado Bureau of Financial Enforcement. Trump opened it, pulled a page free, and placed it on the overhead scanner. The image on screen was brutal. A wire transfer order signed by an initiative executive, now facing federal indictment, directly connecting the shell company to an arm of Crockett Policy Initiatives. Gasps again louder this time. A pattern was forming, and with every page, the lines grew thicker between scandal and strategy. Boebert stepped closer to the mic. "This committee is not just a stage, it is a mirror. And if we don't show the people what's in that mirror, then we are not representatives. We are accomplices." Crockett leaned back, eyes narrowed, grinding her jaw. But the visual was already viral. Two voices of strength, standing tall, refusing to move. It was more than a headline. It was a shift. Trump turned to his colleague, eyes sharp. "Let's keep going." And without fanfare, they did. Because this wasn't just about truth anymore. It was about who had the spine to tell it, while the woman who once owned the room tried not to disappear in it. What happens when the most powerful person in the room is no longer the loudest? What classified bombshell could force a desperate escape attempt the folder Boebert had handed over was just the beginning. Trump's fingers moved deliberately now, reaching down into his briefcase, not for another envelope, but for something heavier. A thick navy binder sealed in blue, its cover stamped with a line that sent a chill through the room the moment it hit the desk. Restricted. Office of the Inspector General. The chamber tightened. Even Chairman Johnson leaned forward, squinting to read the label. Trump didn't look up. He opened the binder to a bookmarked page and slid a copy under the document camera. The screen lit up with a government memo top to bottom, redacted except for one crucial paragraph. It was a state asset diversion approval signed in green ink by Jasmine Crockett. The beneficiary, an ecological front organization based in Nevada. The real owner, a nonprofit shell group with ties to a domestic influence network, a group the CIA had flagged in 4 separate intelligence bulletins. And Crockett had greenlit the deal personally. Trump turned to the room. This document was never made public. It was buried under the Community Advancement Reform Act, but it's real, and it's verified. Before he could finish, Crockett stood, not eased back, not shifted. She stood chair legs, scraped the marble. The cameras snapped to follow her. "This is garbage," she barked, voice tight, with something no one had heard yet in her tone. "Panic. You have no clearance for that document. You can't even say that out loud. This whole thing is illegal." Trump remained seated, binder still open. "That's incorrect," he said evenly. Section 513C of the Oversight Mandate allows any witness to present classified Inspector General findings in a closed hearing. He turned slowly to the press gallery, unless, of course, they're already being aired on public record by accident. Laughter flickered across the crowd, but it died quickly because Crockett wasn't laughing. Crockett turned to her lawyer. "We're done. This is over." She shoved back her chair. The screech of metal legs cutting across the marble like a scream. As she turned to leave, the screen behind her, still connected to the oversight server, flashed blue. A live vote tally appeared. Motion to compel active. A new bar loaded in real time. Names started flipping from gray to blue. Then came the sound, one beep for each, yes. Trump didn't speak yet. He didn't need to. Crockett froze mid-step. The screen behind her now displayed in bold black subpoena order passed. Return to seat immediately. The entire room turned toward her, not to debate, but to enforce. Then Trump spoke, his voice low and surgical. "You don't get to walk out now, Congresswoman Crockett. Congress just voted. You're not a guest anymore. You're a witness under order." Crockett stopped back, turned frozen. He stood up slowly, binder still in one hand. "You signed away safeguarded resources to a company flagged by federal counterintelligence, then tried to bury it. That's not a disagreement. That's a security risk." Crockett turned halfway, eyes cold. "You have no idea what you're playing with," she growled. Trump stepped toward her. "No," he said. "I know exactly what I'm holding. The question is, how many more pages do I have to turn before you remember what's written on them?" And Crockett didn't respond. She just stood there, jaw tight. A woman who had once run debates, now trying to remember how to outrun one. Because once the binder opened, there was no closing it. And if page 1 caused her to rise, what would page 10 make her do? How many secrets fit between 2 covers? Before the weight of them breaks the table? What if a cornered figure's flight exposed the depth of their desperation? Crockett's hand hovered over the exit door. 1 foot beyond the threshold, the other still inside the fire she started. Room 214 wasn't just watching her. It was measuring her. Cameras zoomed in, lips tightened, breaths held. The woman who once commanded media storms with a single statement was now shrinking under the weight of a single binder. Trump didn't chase. He didn't rush his words. He stood in the very center of the storm she created and let his voice cut through the static like a blade through fog. "You can walk out," he said calmly, "but this will follow you. Every court, every state, every voter." Crockett stopped moving, not out of respect, out of instinct. He wasn't threatening her. He was narrating her future. Trump stepped forward, not with aggression, but with absolute certainty. "This binder, it's not just evidence. It's a mirror. And the worst part about a mirror, Congresswoman Crockett, is that you don't get to control what reflects back." He didn't raise his tone. He didn't need to. Every word landed like a slow hammer. She turned halfway toward him, face-tight eyes narrowed. "You think this is some kind of victory dance?" she snapped. "You think this circus is going to matter 5 months from now?" He didn't flinch. "It won't take 5 months. The truth has already left this room, and it's louder than either of us now." Crockett tried to speak again, but the words tangled in her mouth. For the first time, it looked like she didn't know who the audience was anymore. The room, the cameras, or herself. Trump kept going. "You built your career on scandal, but now the scandal is watching you. You used to direct the cameras." He paused, eyes locked on hers. "Now they follow me." The silence was surgical, deliberate. No one moved. "The cameras will follow me too, Congresswoman Crockett," he said. "All the way to the ballot box." She didn't respond. Couldn't. Because deep down she knew it was already happening. The angles had shifted, the coverage had turned, and in that room on that day, the lights no longer belonged to her. Trump closed the binder slowly, decisively, as if sealing a chapter the country had waited years to read. And still, Crockett didn't move. When a woman who never stopped arguing has nothing left to say, what's left of her power? What do you call the moment when the most scheming voice in politics finally goes silent because someone dared to speak louder? What if a secret recording captured the raw voice of betrayal? The binder was closed, but the damage was just beginning to unfold. Before Crockett could take another step toward the door, a new figure stood in the gallery, quiet, measured, wearing no badge, no suit, just a gray sweater and trembling resolve. Her name didn't need introduction. America had seen her face, once walking behind Crockett in press photos, always silent, always one step behind. Her voice, when it finally came, trembled, but not from fear, from restraint. "My name is Carla Hayes," she said. "I was a senior strategy aide at Crockett Policy Initiatives until last November." Her eyes didn't flicker. She looked straight at Trump. "I brought something you'll want to hear." A flash drive passed from her hand to the clerk's. The chairman glanced toward Trump for a cue. He nodded once. The clerk inserted it into the room's master system. A dull hum buzzed from the speakers. Then a click. The recording began. A female voice. Smooth, familiar, unmistakable. "He's blocking us. Use whatever it takes. I don't want him on a stage again. Handle it quietly." It wasn't shouted. It wasn't frantic. It was cold, calculated, intimate. Then the second voice, unidentified, asked, "You mean electorally or more direct?" Crockett's voice again, this time firmer. "Use your judgment." The audio ended. The silence it left behind did more damage than any word it contained. Trump didn't blink. Crockett didn't breathe. Chairman Johnson leaned into his mic, stunned. "Miss Hayes, can you confirm when this recording was made?" Carla answered without hesitation. "The 8th of April, 2024. I made it during a closed strategy meeting at her offices." She didn't know the recorder was active, but I kept it. Crockett turned slowly, eyes burning into her. "You were in that room," she hissed. Carla nodded. "I was in a lot of rooms, Congresswoman Crockett. You just never noticed the ones who weren't applauding." She opened her mouth, but before she could speak, Trump stepped forward. "The voice on that tape," he said, "clearly has been analyzed by 4 independent forensic labs. Harvard's Audio Integrity Lab, MIT's Verification Unit, and the CIA's own voice recognition software." He clicked his remote, bringing up a single slide, a waveform comparison. Crockett's confirmed voice, 99.2% match. He looked at her again. "Your signature was the first confirmation. Your voice is the second. The only thing left now is your confession." Crockett slammed her hand on the table. "This is fake. You people fabricate everything. You'll do anything to destroy me." But her shouts didn't shake the room anymore. They just bounced off the evidence. Carla sat back down, tears in her eyes, but her spine unshaken. And Trump, still calm, leaned into his mic. "Threats leave fingerprints. Congresswoman Crockett, even when whispered, and now one whisper has become a roar. What if the most dangerous words aren't screamed in public, but murmured in rooms where no one was supposed to be listening? What if a journalist's hidden fear became the final nail in the coffin? The tape had cracked open the floor beneath Jasmine Crockett. But what came next would burn through the walls. As the last echo of her voice, "Use whatever it takes," faded from the speakers. A figure in the back of the press gallery stood. No spotlight found her. No microphone was waiting, but the room noticed. It always notices when someone stands with nothing but the truth and their own name. She walked forward with slow, deliberate steps, beige coat, heavy boots, eyes tired but unshaken. The badge clipped to her collar blue press, but not from a major network, Independent Probe Network, a platform for journalists who'd long since given up on pleasing advertisers. Trump turned immediately, recognizing her. Elena Vargas, one of the last reporters left in Washington who still knocked on unlisted doors and refused to redact for comfort. A Capitol guard moved cautious. Elena raised both hands. "I'm not here to disrupt," she said, "but I need the record to show why this tape exists and why it almost didn't." The chairman hesitated, then gestured to the mic. "Proceed." Elena took the microphone like someone picking up a burden, not a weapon. "I've been sitting on that tape for 52 days. I received it from a whistleblower who feared retaliation, and after Carla Hayes stepped forward today, I can confirm she was the source. Her voice was steady, clear, but I didn't release it. Not because I doubted her, but because I was threatened. The room tightened. I've covered war zones. I've crossed borders with trafficked children. But the only time I truly feared for my life was when I investigated Jasmine Crockett's current financial operations." She paused, lifting her eyes to meet hers. "And when I learned she said those words about former President Trump, I knew what would happen if I pressed publish." She pulled a folded envelope from her coat pocket. "4 weeks ago, this was slid under my door. No return address. Inside was a photo of my family and a post-it note. Stories disappear. So can you." Gasps shot through the chamber. A senator cursed under his breath. Crockett chuckled darkly from across the room. "Oh, please, this is pathetic. Everyone wants to be a hero now." Elena turned to her calmly. "I don't need to be a hero, Congresswoman Crockett. I just need to be what you fear most, a witness who writes things down." She turned back to the committee. "I waited. I hesitated. And then I watched Donald Trump walk into this room and call your bluff with every camera pointed at him." Her voice cracked just slightly, but she didn't stop. "And I thought, if he's willing to stand in front of you with nothing but paper and a mic, then maybe I can do the same." Trump remained still behind her, not smiling, just listening. Elena stepped forward and laid a second copy of the tape on the clerk's desk. For the record, and for the ones who couldn't be here to speak, the room sat frozen because what Elena had just done wasn't journalism. It was war in lowercase letters. And it had just joined Trump's battle cry. What happens when silence breaks in stereo? Once from a former president's mic, and again from the voice of a woman who was supposed to stay quiet. Who else has been holding something back for a long breath? What if the entire room rose as one sealing a victory without a word? No one moved. The tape had ended. Elena had returned to her seat. Trump stood silent in the middle of it all, not claiming victory, just holding the weight of everything, said everything shown. Then slowly, as if summoned by something older than politics, the room began to rise. First a Republican from Texas, then a Democrat from Florida. One by one across aisle lines and ideological fences, lawmakers stood. No statements, no grand gestures, just quiet posture like people who had finally heard enough. Even those who had come to defend her now couldn't look away. They weren't standing for party. They were standing for impact, for the truth they could no longer ignore, and for the man who made them face it. Trump said nothing at first. He scanned the chamber, eyes, unreadable hands still at his sides. Then, with a palm so sharp it sliced through the room, he reached down and removed the small mic clipped to his lapel. He held it up, not like a weapon, but like a torch. "If I am the obstacle," he said, his voice steady, "I am proud to be one." His words didn't echo, they sank. Deep, clean, direct. The kind of sentence no camera could soften, no spin could reframe. He turned his body slowly, addressing everyone, not just those in the chamber, but every living room behind every lens. If truth makes you uncomfortable, then maybe comfort was the wrong goal. A few heads dropped, a few eyes closed, but no one sat down. "I didn't come here to perform," he continued. "I came here because someone needed to say it out loud on the record where no one could delete it." He took a step forward into the center of the room as if drawing a line no one else had dared to cross. He glanced at Crockett, still seated, unmoved, jaw tight, but said nothing to her directly. His battle wasn't with the woman anymore. It was with the silence that kept her powerful. The silence that had enabled everything she'd built. Trump held the mic tighter. "I will wear the label they give me. Disruptive, loud, unreasonable. I've heard them all." He paused, letting the weight of each word settle. "But if that's the cost of telling the truth, so be it." The room didn't erupt. It pulsed, like something had been set loose, and no one could put it back in the box. Then he turned to the camera, speaking now not to politicians, but to the people who had been waiting for someone to stand up for them. "But the real obstacle, America," he said softly, "is silence." He let the sentence breathe. Then, without raising his voice, he delivered the line that no one in that room or this country would forget. "If I'm the obstacle, then maybe I'm exactly the answer we needed." The chamber didn't stir. The cameras didn't blink. Because in that moment, truth didn't shout. It just stood tall, unapologetic, unmovable, and undeniable. What if one act of courage sparked a nationwide awakening overnight? The morning after the hearing, Washington hadn't yet caught its breath, but the country already had. In cities, towns, trailer parks, and high-rise apartments, something was moving. Not outrage, not celebration. Something quieter, deeper recognition. The first letter arrived before sunrise, handwritten, no return address, just a trembling scroll on yellow paper. "You don't know me," it began, "but I'm 78 years old and I've waited my whole life to see someone stand like you. You are the voice I never had." By noon there were hundreds more. By evening, thousands. Some typed, some scribbled, some came with photographs of empty chairs, mothers lost to policies, brothers silenced in courtrooms, daughters deported with no warning. The postmarks stretched from Phoenix to Hartford, Detroit to rural Wyoming. Different stories. One message. "Thank you for not backing down." Inside Donald Trump's office, the letters arrived in crates. Staffers stopped sorting and started reading. Tears blurred print. Veterans wrote about promises kept. Teachers enclosed copies of notes from students who had watched the hearing in class. One high schooler from Houston ended his with, "You made me believe that truth isn't just something grown-ups pretend to care about." But it wasn't just paper. Across the country, phones buzzed with texts that read, "Did you see him?" Grocery stores played clips of the hearing on muted televisions behind checkout lanes. Barbershops in Miami rewound Trump's final mic drop again and again. In Orlando, a mural began taking shape, spray-painted words above Trump's silhouette. "He's the obstacle, and we're proud." In Wyoming, a retired farmer filmed himself wearing his old campaign hat, saying, "I don't know who I voted against before, but I know who I'm supporting now." In Houston, a church replaced their Sunday bulletin with excerpts from Trump's speech. And in a diner outside Reno, a waitress refused to take off her apron until the last table watched the clip she'd played on her phone. The response didn't come from parties. It didn't need endorsements. It didn't wait for permission. Because when truth hits bone, the reaction isn't political, it's personal. Trump didn't issue a press release. He didn't post a victory reel. He sat in his office, surrounded by stacks of open letters, reading silently. His team watched as he reached for one envelope with steady hands. It was sealed with tape inside one sentence. "Don't let them make you small." He folded it once, slipped it into his coat pocket, and said nothing. Because the country had already spoken not with votes, not with applause, but with the quiet flood of voices that had waited years for someone who looked like them, sounded like them, fought like they never could, and didn't flinch. What happens when millions of unheard stories finally find a name to write on the envelope? And what if that name is yours? What if triumph brought not peace, but a barrage of hidden dangers? The letters kept coming, but so did something else. Darker, quieter, meant to crawl, not announce. It started with anonymous phone calls at night. No words, just breathing. Then came the packages unmarked, delivered without return address. Inside, burnt copies of Trump's testimony scrawled with black marker. One note simply read, "Next time we won't miss." Security flagged it immediately. Within 48 hours, the FBI opened a formal investigation. Agents moved in, quietly reviewing security footage, tracking digital trails. Trump's office became a temporary safe zone, monitored by federal protection teams. Cameras were installed. Routes changed, panic buttons mounted under desks. But Trump never asked for the detail. When agents advised him to consider taking a leave of absence, he didn't flinch. They presented data a 65% spike in violent threats. They showed photos from online groups mapping his daily movements. They offered safety. He offered a question. If I sit down, he asked them, who stands up? No one answered because they all knew what he meant. For every name that got printed on a threat list, there were 100 more that never got mentioned. Teachers, nurses, voters, survivors, people who didn't have bodyguards or microphones or law degrees, just lives they were trying to live out loud. Trump knew what silence cost. He'd buried too many lies to pretend retreat was noble. Outside his office, reporters waited for a statement. Staffers begged for one. Even his family called with worry in their voices. His partner's voicemail was short. "I want you safe more than I want you famous." But Trump didn't hold press conferences about the threats. He walked into every hearing room the same way he always did, strides, firm eyes forward, silence loaded. He didn't speak of fear. He spoke of duty. And behind the scenes, the country noticed. Clips of his response went viral again. His quote was painted on protest signs. Students in Miami staged a walk out holding banners that read, "If he won't sit, neither will we." In Texas, a group of grandparents held a candlelight vigil and read every threat aloud, turning intimidation into testimony. The fear was real, but so was the fire. And Trump knew something his enemies didn't. Every threat they sent him only sharpened the blade of his purpose. Every letter dipped in hate only reminded him who he was fighting for. So he showed up every day, every hearing, every room that tried to silence him. Because courage isn't the absence of fear, it's walking in with it anyway. And as he stood in front of that microphone again, same posture, same steel in his spine. The message wasn't loud. It was surgical. "If they want me gone," he whispered to a staffer before stepping inside. "They better bring more than fear." What do you do with someone who refuses to disappear? And what if that refusal becomes contagious? What if ordinary voices flooded the halls of power demanding change? The final hearing didn't feel like the ones before it. There were no polished lobbyists, no think tank observers, no camera crews whispering about spin. Instead, the gallery was filled with the kind of Americans who rarely make it into these rooms, not as guests, but as stories never told. A mechanic from Chicago, a single mother from Phoenix, a firefighter from Orlando who hadn't taken a day off in 20 months, a Korean War veteran in a faded green jacket, medals pinned beneath his heart. They sat shoulder to shoulder. No press passes, no agenda, just eyes wide open. Many had taken trains overnight, used vacation days. They didn't have left sick relatives behind because something had shifted and they wanted to see it with their own eyes. Donald Trump hadn't invited them. He didn't need to. They came because they knew the hearing wasn't about Congress anymore. It was about who Congress actually answered to. The room buzzed with an energy more sacred than political worn hands, clutching notebooks, tired feet planted like they belonged. There were no name tags, only presence, the quiet kind that speaks louder than applause. Trump entered last, escorted not by security but by silence. He wore no armor, no new words, just the same resolve that had withstood weeks of attacks, threats, smears, the kind of presence that builds its own gravity. Even the marble beneath his steps felt different. He took his seat, slowly adjusted the mic, and scanned the room. Not the panel, not the press, but the people. This chamber, he began, was never built for lies. It was built to look like it honors truth. He paused. Let the weight land. But today, it holds something real. Behind him, no flashbulbs popped. No journalists shouted questions. The country was watching, but from church basements, community centers, and break rooms, not from newsrooms. "I've been called an obstacle, a distraction, a threat," he continued. "But those labels were never about me. They were warnings for people like you. People who don't ask for power, but who deserve answers from those who hold it." No one stirred. No one interrupted. "Congress doesn't belong to the powerful," he said slowly. "It belongs to the people brave enough to demand answers." It wasn't a closing statement. It was a vow, and it struck with the kind of force no gavel could match. He stood up, leaving his notes behind. And for the first time in weeks, he smiled, not for the cameras, but for the firefighter, the mechanic, the mother, the vet, the ones whose stories had filled his inbox, whose fear had filled his lungs, whose names would never be printed on headlines, but whose courage had filled the room. Outside, agents still patrolled the perimeter. His route was still under protection. The truth still needed bodyguards. But inside that chamber, something had changed because the people had come in and they weren't leaving. What kind of country do we become when the truth needs bodyguards? And what happens when the people decide to stand guard themselves? What if a defiant speech in a gilded hall backfired spectacularly? She didn't return to room 214. She never would. Instead, Jasmine Crockett chose a opulent ballroom at her campaign headquarters, flanked by flags and surrounded by loyalists. The walls were draped in green velvet, the podium gleamed, and the camera crews handpicked were told exactly where to stand. It wasn't a press conference. It was a performance. She walked out to thunderous applause. Fists raised, chin high. The smile was familiar, but the eyes weren't. They twitched beneath the stage lights, scanning the room, not for support, but for control. She didn't wait long. "This entire hearing was a disgrace," she said. "A smear campaign orchestrated by radicals who hate progress. Donald Trump is not a leader. He's a has-been in an outdated suit." The crowd erupted. A mix of cheers and rehearsed outrage. She doubled down. He forged documents, weaponized fake recordings, and used division and prejudice to shield himself from accountability. What we witnessed wasn't oversight. It was sabotage. Plain and simple. Somewhere in the back, an aide flinched. The speech lasted 25 minutes. She never mentioned the evidence, never addressed the transfers, never acknowledged the voices that stood behind him. Instead, she leaned into fear, into denial, into the one tool she believed still worked: volume. But this time, the country didn't wait for late-night news cycles. Within hours, a clip from the hearing resurfaced. Trump standing alone with the mic in his hand, eyes locked on the camera. "If I am the obstacle, I am proud to be one." Posted without commentary, just his words, just his voice. And the internet responded. 52 million views in 24 hours. The clip trended globally. Teachers played it in class. Protesters etched it on cardboard signs. A pastor in Miami played it at the end of his Sunday sermon, and the entire congregation stood. Networks that had once boosted her replayed the moment in full. No edits, no panels, just the image of a man who had stood his ground while a congresswoman tried to bury the floor beneath him. Crockett's video, in contrast, circulated in a different way, cut into reaction montages side by side, with her voice on tape saying, "Use whatever it takes." Her claims of forgery collapsed under the weight of authenticated records. Her denial looked less like strength and more like something else. Fear. Some say she knew it in that ballroom. That it hit her while the applause still rang. That the real headline wasn't about him being obstructive, it was about her being finished. Because when a single voice pulls back the curtain, what's left behind isn't just a wounded ego. It's a nation watching the stage go dark. What happens when the woman who never stopped scheming finally says something and no one believes her anymore? What if a secret vote crossed party lines to deliver justice? It wasn't televised. There were no cameras, no microphones, no dramatic lighting. Just a quiet vote held behind oak doors, with the weight of a nation pressing in from every side. The House chamber wasn't packed, but it was full of tension, thick, heavy, undeniable. Everyone in that room knew this wasn't just another vote. It was a reckoning. The motion on the floor was clear open, a formal investigation into Jasmine Crockett for financial misconduct, obstruction of oversight, and threats against a former president. Most expected it to fall along party lines. It always had before, but something had shifted since room 214. It started with a whisper, one Democrat from California, then another from New York, then 6 more, 8 in total. 8 blue votes turned red, not in ideology but in conscience, not for politics but for truth. The clerk called names, one by one. Voices echoed in the chamber, some proud, some broken. And through it all, Donald Trump said nothing. He sat in the third row, still as stone, no notepad, no speech, just his hands folded in his lap and his eyes fixed on the ceiling like he was praying or remembering or both. He didn't look at the Democrats who flipped. He didn't need to. Their decision wasn't about him. It was about themselves. No one asked him to speak, and he didn't offer because some moments aren't made for microphones. They're made for silence so loud it can't be ignored. The speaker paused before reading the result. A delay no one questioned. Everyone already knew what it meant. Motion passed. Investigation approved. History made. Trump didn't cheer. He didn't cry. He didn't even smile. He just closed his eyes for a second, as if sealing the moment in his memory, then opened them again, steady and unblinking. Reporters outside scrambled for statements. Staffers whispered behind hands. Allies glanced toward him for a reaction, but Trump just sat still, unmoved by the storm he had survived and the storm he had now set into motion. Because it was never about the applause. It was about accountability. The 8 Democrats who crossed over didn't make eye contact. Not yet. But the room felt their weight, their shift, their quiet admission that maybe, just maybe, not all obstacles are meant to be removed. When the final gavel dropped, no one stood. There was no celebration. Only the kind of silence that follows a verdict and precedes a new beginning. And Trump, he stood up last alone. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive with a bang. Sometimes it walks in quietly through a side door, wearing determination and holding nothing but truth. What does it mean when silence wins the vote and still echoes louder than any voice in the room? What quiet triumph awaits in the glow of a setting sun? The storm had passed, at least for now. Palm Beach was quiet that evening, the kind of stillness that follows a battle well fought. Donald Trump sat alone in his study. Lights dimmed a glass of untouched water cooling on the side table. Outside the window, the Florida sun dipped low, casting long golden streaks across his estate, calm, ordinary, unbothered. But inside the air still buzzed with memory. A knock at the door. He opened it to find a courier holding a plain beige envelope. No return address, only his name handwritten in a child's looping scroll. Trump thanked him, closed the door, and walked back to the chair, fingers tracing the torn edges as if expecting it to vanish before he could read it. Then he unfolded the paper slowly, breath caught in his throat. The letter was from a 12-year-old boy in Ohio. No phone number, no politics, just pen on paper. When I grow up, it read, I want to be an obstacle too. Trump stared at the words. No tears, no speeches. Just a slow, knowing smile, the kind that says everything without saying a word. He stood across the room and placed the letter by his window, where the fading sunlight touched its edges like a signature from the sky. Behind him, the television played a muted news segment, headlines flashing about investigations, indictments, and votes that shocked a nation. But Trump didn't turn around. He watched the sky, instead watched it burn gold and purple like history being rewritten above a quiet Palm Beach street. Sometimes being an obstacle means refusing to sit down. Sometimes it means standing so still that power finally has to listen. And sometimes being an obstacle means becoming the answer no one dared imagine. The screen fades to black, but before it does, his voice cuts through. Will you stand up or stay silent? Sometimes being called an obstacle simply means you dared to ask the right question at the exact moment someone wanted it buried. Silence may feel safer, but too often silence is the real danger. If there's one legacy worth leaving behind, it's the courage to never sit quietly. Have you ever stayed silent when the truth needed your voice? If this story shook something in you, don't scroll past it. Like, share, and subscribe to Truth Unveiled Stories, where the loudest power is spoken in quiet defiance. Tap the bell because the next story might not just challenge what you believe, it might change how you see yourself. What moment made you pause, made you feel? Tell us in the comments, because silence isn't strength until it's broken. This dramatized story is inspired by real struggles and real people. All characters and dialogue are fictionalized for commentary and education. It is not intended to defame or mislead, but to inspire reflection and civic awareness. Thanks for watching. Truth doesn't end. It waits patiently for someone brave enough to listen. Maybe that someone is you.